Okay, so welcome. So this is going to be Passing the Torch, a presentation on officer transitions. This presentation is by Student Activities. I am the graduate assistant for student organizations and student activities. My name is Mark Gonzalez. For the purpose of this presentation, we have adapted some information from University of Central Florida and their officer transition checklist. So what and why? We're going to touch on, so what is the purpose of this presentation? So the purpose is to give your organization some strategies that will allow your organization to have a smooth officer transition from year to year. And so a little bit on why it is important for transitions to occur and why you should focus in on having an officer transition is the single most important event that takes place in the student organization year, whether that be an academic year from August to August or a fiscal year from January to December. This allows the newly elected officers to become better acclimated with their position that they are going to be fulfilling within the next year, and allows new officers and the organization to have continued growth and success throughout their time. So some transition practices that will also is a little bit of an overview of what's going to be in this presentation. We're going to talk over officer binders, officer shadowing, outgoing and incoming officer meetings, org sync, and officer transition checklists. So typically in the fall or sometimes in January, we have a lot of organizations that come in and they're like, I'm the new president, I have not been given access to anything, I don't know how to do anything. So that's why we try and have this presentation every semester to hit both the fiscal and academic transitions to help the organizations out the best we can. So officer binders. Officer binder, it's kind of exactly what it sounds. The purpose is to document and keep track of everything that your org did during your term. So we definitely suggest that you compile documents in the binder as they happen as opposed to at the end of the term. Typically, when transitions come around, officers try and just get everything together and just hand it off to the next officer. So if you work on these officer binders and work on them throughout the year and throughout your term, it's going to better help you in the end when it's the end of your term, and especially for those graduating seniors. These officer binders might not be the priority on your list with graduation coming up, but is also going to help the incoming officer. So some contents that we kind of have put together on what you should have in the binder. This binder should really serve as almost an expectation for this officer. So whether that be president, vice president, and I will give an example on the event chair. Here's everything that we did. Here's all the documents, but also here are some expectations that you should be wanting to fulfill in your term. So some context would be an officer manual, whether that be the job responsibilities, and anything that's really included in your constitution and bylaws that is the responsibility of the officer. If you are the vice president and one of your duties is that you need to fill in for the president in their absence, then you're going to want to be sure that that's all that's included and that the vice president knows some of the things that they would do if they needed to be the acting president. As opposed to the acting president's gone, the acting president has their binder, and now the vice president doesn't necessarily know what to do when they have to run a meeting or anything like that. Another thing is just to copy those responsibilities. Any current forms that you may have, and whether that be current forms with your bank account, current forms that you have with our Office of Student Activities, or if you are an organization that has a national organization, any forms that may have to deal with that. A record of activities from the previous term, whether that be minute meetings, your event meetings, especially we'll hit right here on the event chair, and any forms, checking account forms, all of that you were given as president that was either handed down to you or that you came into possession with during your term, and then you can kind of pass it down along the way. Calendar of the previous events, so that's going to have to do with when you had events, when you had meetings, when you had, if there was any very important meetings, whether that be a meeting that you had with your national organization or anything like that. Recommendations for the current term. So this should be something that's just right at the front. These are the things that maybe you as the current president didn't hit on during your term, or maybe a project or something that you may have started and that you want to suggest to the next president to make their job easier, to make the organization run more efficiently or even better the organization from where you're leaving it. And then just other relevant position resources, so whether that be passwords to all your bank accounts and your Twitter and Facebook and all of those things. Typically, after new officers take over, a lot of times organizations have to change passwords and change all of those things. Any bank account information, and whether that be that you have submitted the new checking account verification form and it's already ready for these new officers to be added to the bank account, or whether that be steps that they need to get added to the bank account, and that would include passwords and security questions. The answer to the security questions, that typically is one that you'll get text messages like, what are the answers to the security questions? So if you pass those along, then that's going to help the incoming officer. And just other campus information that you may have, whether that be you have forms and documents and conversations that you have with scheduling services for your event that were written really well, and the next president wants to, kind of do the event the same way you did. If you hand over those scheduling information and papers that you had with someone from union scheduling services, then they already have that information. And just a letter to the next officer. Words of encouragement. This kind of also ties into just recommendations for the upcoming year and anything that you feel will benefit them in their term. Being a president of an organization and an officer in general can typically be a very stressful time, especially on top of your school if you have another job. So just a letter that, however your organization runs that you feel might benefit the next officer. So just an example, we have our event chair. So some of the stuff that would be included in the binder would be event plans with description of the events. Then you would have your budgets for each event, and you can, if you kind of compile this, then you kind of know, this is going to help the president, and if you have a treasurer that's heavily involved, this is going to know, our budget was $500 and this event went successfully, and kind of you can move things around to be like, let's allot a little bit more money for this event next year to see if we can make it even better, or just to know, this event can function on this amount of money. This is going to be the continuing amount that we do provide for this event. A calendar of those events, if you're an organization that has a lot of events, monthly, weekly, or and throughout the year, a calendar of events, and for specific things, if you're tabling in the library mall, if you're doing certain things and there's good times that the event, for the event to take place, you're getting a little bit more traffic, and the traffic that you do anticipate. This will help those officers to know that, we had an event at 12:30, we talked to 20 people, and then we had an event at 3 o'clock and we had 50 people come by our table or anything like that. That's going to help with getting your organization some more exposure. Any maps, if you have certain maps for certain setups of your events. Volunteer sheets and schedules. These volunteer sheets is also kind of a way for you to pass down information to previous volunteers. So if your volunteers aren't a part of your organization, this will give you the opportunity to have their contact information for next year to be able to contact them and ask them if they're willing to volunteer at the event again, or anything of that sort. Scheduling the event, for each event having, what time does it start, what time does it end, and everything that's going to happen in between, at that event. A list of contacts, whether that be you've had one event for the past 30 years and you've talked to the same representative from scheduling services, and they always know how you want the event and it's always successful when you're working with them, then having those contacts. If you, for student organizations, there will be a different graduate assistant next year, but having Callie Jorgensen, the coordinator of student organization, having her contact information and the information for our office and any other contacts that you may deem necessary. And any contracts, if you have contracts with any outside vendors or university vendors, whether that be food and, I don't know what the last part of that,
venue.
Yeah, and whether you have contacts with any other offices on campus, contracts with any other offices on campus, if you're doing any events that you've had contracts with the Dean of Students office, just having all of those included. So the next topic that we will talk about is officer shadowing. And this is another great practice that can really help the incoming officer know about what to expect, and give them a better understanding. It's one thing to be given all of this information and be able to read it, and it's one thing to actually sit in on a meeting or kind of follow the officer and see what they actually do on a day-to-day or meeting-to-meeting basis. And so some topics to cover if you do have an officer shadowing is the purpose of the position and the vision that you would like this position to take in the future. And that does tie back into when I mentioned those letters that you write to the next officer and any recommendation. You can give them that vision of what the future of this organization should look like, or you would like it to look like as the outgoing president. A review of the past year, those likes, dislikes, successes, and improvements that you think would be good information for the incoming officer to know. And things you wish you knew when you got into the position. So is there things that your former president didn't necessarily tell you that would have made your job a lot easier? Or are there things that you just learned within your position that maybe weren't included in the officer manual that was kind of handed down to you? And those would be things that we suggest you include, that's how you could also talk about them in those offers within the officer shadowing. The binder of the position, this would be kind of when you sit down with the incoming officer and just go through the binder. Like I said, it's one thing to read it, it's one thing to actually know what's in it and actually know what you'd be doing. So take some time to go through that binder, and that doesn't have to be in the same, in the same meeting or same encounter. You can split that up however you like. And that's another reason that we suggest that when you transition, we suggest that the elections happen in 1 month, and then a month later is when that transition happens. So this officer shadowing ideally could take place for an entire month. And whether that be you want to meet 4 times weekly between that month, or whether you want to meet bi-weekly or anything like that. And lastly, again, just like I've been mentioning, those words of encouragement. Encouragement of, it is possible. School can be very stressful on top of everything else. And so just those encouraging words can help them have a better mindset of going into this presidency. So outgoing and incoming officer meeting. So the purpose of this meeting is between all of your officers, is to have a review of the previous term. Discuss ways to improve the org and even the events for the upcoming year. And this is going to include everyone, your outgoing, incoming president, if you have vice president, treasurer, and any officer positions that you feel would be important to have in this meeting. And it would be facilitated how you run any other officer meeting. So however your organization deems necessary to hold officer meetings, that's the way that we suggest it kind of to take place. It would just be a regular meeting, and they would be in on the meeting, and kind of that would also take place in kind of the shadowing of position to position. And what to do, just review goals that you set in the previous term. If you and the past president before you didn't set goals, then you do that within yourself and see if those goals were met. So if this is something new, if this is a new practice that your organization might be considering doing, sit down with the new president, write those goals, and so then when they are outgoing and there's going to be an incoming president, they can review those goals and see, these are the things we're doing consistently, these are the things that we need to continue to do. Write a list of expectations for the incoming officer. So what are your expectations of the next president and the next president? And this can be a list that continues to be, you add on it from year to year, and as things change, right now, organizations, the social media presence is huge. 10 years ago, social media was not how organizations recruited members and, showed off their events and kind of how they got attention to their organization. And then not just write those expectations and give them to the incoming officer, talk about them. So that whether that be you're having the meeting, you're in the middle of the meeting, and you give some time. You give 10 minutes during the meeting for each position to talk about that letter with their the officer that's going to replace them. And then just evaluate those programs, meetings, and other events, and ways you can improve. I believe that there's always room for improvement, and the way student organizations are run and led, and the way, like I mentioned, with social media, everything is ever changing. So figuring out those things that you need to do, and the incoming officer would need to do to make the organization continue to succeed. Next, we'll touch on org sync. So org sync, like I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, org sync is one of those biggest things that organizations come in and they say, I have no access to org sync, we can't do anything, we're 2 weeks into school, we don't have a meeting room, we're supposed to meet tomorrow. So just figuring those things out. First and foremost, upload those files. So if you have those officer expectations, you're able to upload those files to org sync and monitor who sees them. So you can put that you only want the group of officers to see them, or administrators. and then when they log on, they'll be able to see those files. Typically, when you log on, you'll see 3 files that are kind of provided by OrgSync, and so you can continue to add to those. There's also OrgSync tutorials for those new officers, so definitely suggest for them to check those out to figure out how OrgSync works. I've been in my position for I don't know how long, over 6 months, and there's still new things that I'm figuring out about OrgSync every day. So in your term as president, you may not know everything about OrgSync, but at least know enough to be able to function and to be able to do the things you need to do, from registration to event requests to adding people and giving them permissions. And in addition, OrgSync does do a live chat. So at any time, if you have questions, you can chat with OrgSync and say, this is a question that I have. Maybe Student Activities is closed at the time, but OrgSync, their headquarters and their live chat is still open. So you can chat with them and they can help you figure out any issues that you may have. And those OrgSync people on OrgSync have permissions to kind of do everything and beyond. Next, as I kind of touched on, is adding those administrators. So whether that be you would like to do that at the time of elections, you want to add those new officers and administrators. So between the month of them being elected and then transitioning and the time that they're shadowing you, they can kind of look around OrgSync and figure out how it works before, especially for those graduating seniors, before they're gone and maybe not as accessible as they are right now on campus still in their term, and give them those permissions. And so whether that be you as the president, as the outgoing president, adds the current president as the administrator and gives them all the permissions, and then it can kind of be the responsibility of the incoming president to add all the rest of their officers to give those permissions. That'd be something to figure out between you and the incoming president and how things have kind of worked in the past, or if you're wanting to change them, how you want them to work in the future. And then updating the portal. So as you all know, we do registration every semester in the fall and in the spring. And so updating the portal, and for the spring it's a little bit easier, you don't have to go to the orientation, but make sure that those officers that have been newly elected, newly transitioned, are reflected in the OrgSync portal. So when we from Student Activities need to email all the presidents who may be interested in tabling at Mean Green Fling in the fall, the incoming president, their information is included in there, so we're not emailing someone that has graduated and maybe not even checking their UNT email at this point anymore. So next is going to be a little bit, is kind of what you have in front of you in this officer transition checklist. This is kind of some generic things that we suggest, some things that I have touched on at the beginning parts of this presentation, and you can use this as a guide if you want to keep some of these, if you want to add some new things, depending on the organization you have and the type of organization you have. So the purpose of the officer transition checklist is to provide a structured list of things to do before and after elections. So this is not necessarily something that will deal specifically with kind of expectations, but you as the president, these are the things that, as the current president, these are all the things that need to happen before we can even host elections. And then after that, this is going to be the process that we have, leading into our transition, and some things that, some check boxes that even the incoming president or other officer will address after they have fully transitioned. So some things on just the before. So before officer elections. So just review those officer descriptions. Sometimes within organizations, you kind of, from semester to semester, you might have a social chair, and the next semester some things happen and you don't necessarily have a social chair, and you've kind of adjusted those descriptions. You as the president, as the outgoing president, have taken on some responsibilities. The treasurer has taken on some responsibilities, in figuring out those things of what you as the outgoing president or officer did with your organization, within your organization. And so determine a nomination time. When are you going to host those nominations? When are you going to host those elections? And this might be something that you have done way in advance. You scheduled it at the beginning of the semester. This is when our officer nominations and elections are going to be. But if you haven't, as those times approach, as the end of your term approaches, in regards to kind of what you've written in your constitution, figuring out when that's going to be, figuring out the time, location, and the procedures. Especially if you're a Greek organization, there are a lot of policies and procedures that you need to follow in electing your new officers. And non-Greek organizations, especially some of the ones that have national and international affiliates, there are some procedures, but if you're just an organization that started here at UNT, within your constitution and your bylaws, there are still some things that are outlined on how to elect officers and what to do before and after. And make sure to communicate that to the members. If you are an organization that maybe has a quota, you have to have so many people at the meeting to vote. Make sure that your members know that yes, this is our weekly meeting, but this is the meeting that we're going to have nominations, whether that be that they're wanting to be elected or whether that be that you need them there to vote in order to meet your member quota. Be sure that they know that it's taking place at that time. Develop a list of expectations for the outgoing officer. And so what are the things that need to be completed before the completion of the term? And whether this was something that was handed to you, kind of willed down to you in the binder that you may already have, or this is something that you've kind of done as yourself and you've discussed maybe at a previous officer meeting of, as president, these are all the things I need to do before elections come, vice president, treasurer, etc. Review constitution, bylaws, and other org-specific documents. And with this is something that you're going to want to do a little bit, obviously previous to elections, but are there things that need to be changed in reference to your constitution and bylaws? Is there new voting policies? Is there new election policies? And being sure all these things are updated before the election happens, especially since you as the outgoing officer might know a little bit more on what's happening with the constitution and bylaws if they are changing. As I mentioned in the last slide, just submitting those updates to OrgSync, whether that's updating your president if it's the time of elections and you might also be getting a new advisor because your advisor's leaving. Be sure that you're reflecting all of those things in your OrgSync profile. And then create a list of accomplishments. So, and this is kind of how I talked about, the things that went well, and providing those lists of, these are the things that myself as the outgoing officer, these are all the things that I did well, and these are all the things that the organization did well. And so that this can be something that you're also compiling to leave in the binder that you're going to pass down to your next officer. And most importantly, have all these documents ready by elections. So that's kind of, you can give yourself a deadline of, I still have a month left in my term, but ideally the binder that you're going to hand down to your next officer is already completed. You kind of you put everything in there and figured all of those things out. And then you have your after officer elections. So typically for most organizations, as I did mention earlier, there is kind of that month of transition between elections and fully transitioning those officers. So if this is something you do have, or whether at elections your officers take over, these are things for the new officer to consider, and we would hope that you, as the outgoing president or officer, are still kind of helping the organization out, and you're not kind of just dropping everything at the doorstep and taking your exit. So update those OrgSync with the new officers if this is not something that you as the outgoing president or officer did. This is going to be something that the new officers want to do. They've been given the administrative and all of the permissions that they need, so now maybe it's their responsibility to update all those things in OrgSync. And that's something for you all to just talk about amongst your organization and figure out kind of how things have been done in the past or how you would like to see them done in the future. Notify the advisor. If the advisor is, if your advisor is not someone that's actively involved in your organization and they don't sit in on meetings or anything like that, be sure that they know, first and foremost, also that elections were happening. So I guess that is something that maybe should be put on the before list. But that, this is, the officers have officially been elected, these are the new officers, this is their contact information. And especially if your advisor is actively involved, or if this is something that your advisor, as maybe an alum of your organization, needs to let your national or international affiliates know, if you do have those, be sure that they know that. And so next would be setting up a retreat or officer transition meeting. Either one really works. You could also reserve a room in the union on a Saturday and kind of do a retreat, that's not out in a cabin in the middle of the woods, but something that's a little bit more feasible for your organization depending on the type. Some organizations do have a little bit more funding and time to host a weekend-long retreat with their officers or maybe all of their members, and some organizations are looking for something a little bit quicker and a little bit more cost-effective. So, and if you're going to have more than one officer transition meeting, figuring out those dates. You as the outgoing officer and you as the incoming officer, figuring out those dates that are going to work for both of you and then work for all of the outgoing and incoming officers. And in addition to those meetings, setting up those office shadowing and individual training meetings. If you are not going to have a full officer transition meeting and you're just going to, you as the president are going to meet with the new president, and it's the responsibility of the vice president and the treasurer to kind of figure those things out, be sure that you're setting up those shadowing times and those individual training meetings. Next would be registering your organization with student activities via OrgSync. I know I've touched on this a number of times, but like I did say, this is kind of something that we see organizations run into every semester, whether that be fall or spring. And so figuring out those things. If you were elected in December and you fully take over in January, know that typically there's a January deadline for organizations to be registered by for the spring, or vice versa, even if you're doing that in the fall. Typically in the fall, those officers that are elected at the end of the spring for the fall semester, they have a little bit more time because they have that summer to kind of figure things out and get all those requirements taken care of. If you are taking over in a fall semester, be sure that your officers are attending a registered student org orientation. If you're a Greek organization or if you're an organization that is part of Rec Sports, those are the certain organizations that we do require a president or risk management chair to attend those orientations, but for the rest of those organizations, we just require one of your officers. And that be one of those officers that's reflected on your OrgSync profile. Some organizations have a treasurer, but they also have a financial chair that kind of helps the treasurer as needed. But sometimes that financial chair doesn't always reflect on OrgSync. They're helping an officer, but they're not an actual officer. Be sure that someone who's attending this is an officer and it's reflected on the profile. And with that, even if it's not a requirement, even if it's not the fall semester and you're not required to attend the org orientation, we do host them in the spring. So, figuring those logistics out to come and attend, we do pass on a lot of information at those org orientations. And so if you're just kind of trying to get a little bit more insight on the back end and on the requirements of student activities and the benefits you get as a registered student organization, attending in a semester that org orientation is not required will only benefit you. And then reserve those org meeting locations and times in the event application. So, like I did mention, organizations do have to register in the fall and the spring. And so if you're the incoming officer and you need to register, you'll register with our office. Once you're approved, then you can reserve those org meeting locations. So that's something to always focus on in August or whenever you transition at the end of your term, to be sure that once school starts, there'll be your organization, whether you're outgoing or you're the incoming officer, that you'll be able to meet as soon as you want. So, like I mentioned, orgs come in about the second week and they're like, oh, we don't have access, and they're having meetings in the library or at people's apartments because they haven't registered and they can't get a room just yet. And then developing an org calendar of events and post them to OrgSync. So if you know that you want to have your meetings on every Tuesday night at 7 o'clock, this is something that you can submit an event request. Even if you're not just registered yet, we won't give it attention until you're officially registered, but if this is something that your meeting times from semester to semester never change, submit that event request and say, location is to be determined. Or if you don't know, if you know that you're with a campus ministry and you always meet at the campus ministry location, but you don't know the date and time that you're going to meet, then put the date and time on there and put that the date and time to be announced, but the location is for sure. So next, before we start to wrap things up, I'll kind of turn it over to you all, and you can kind of discuss it amongst yourselves. Is there anything that I may have not mentioned that your organization does when they transition, and things that have worked well, or and you can kind of share those ideas amongst each other.
doesn't follow like the binder, that's what we do. It's just like I guess we go more in detail in the binder, so we won't have to beat up on each other.
Yeah, for my organization, the past couple years before I joined, it was really unorganized, and there was not like people interested in the organization, so there wasn't strong leadership. So I think I might have heard the binder idea from y'all, but we're incorporating that this year. But I want to make sure this year, whenever we're leaving, we have like a really strong constitution to go off of when things like pop up. So I'm planning for the transition meeting to pretty much go over like checklists, the constitution, things like that.
Yeah.
We don't have a constitution.
Okay. And that's something that we do as student activities. We do provide a sample constitution. I know that some organizations that have national and other affiliates, they kind of are just given, this is your constitution, these are the things you have to follow in order to be able to be recognized by us. But as student activities, there are a few things that we require in terms of, if your officers are eligible, what it takes for your advisor to be eligible, and just some membership statements that focus on, being non-discriminatory, hazing clauses and such like that we do require. So we do have a sample constitution that's provided on our website that you can kind of look at, and if this is something as the outgoing officer that you're looking to start a constitution or even improve your constitution, I did, how I did mention before, to review that constitution. This is something that you can do, this can be one of your last projects before you leave the new incoming president with all of that information. And then, we have touched it, we kind of talked to some student organizations. When we have new organizations, some of them are kind of like, why do we have to have a constitution? And sometimes organizations don't look at, they don't have to look at their constitution every day and from meeting to meeting, because they kind of run it as an organization, and the constitution and the bylaws serve as just, legalities. When something does come up and you don't know the process of, you don't have an officer that's ineligible, what do you do from there? And sometimes those things are outlined in the Constitution to say, okay, this officer is not eligible, maybe this officer is putting up a fight, but you have to let them know, this is our Constitution, this is what we follow. We may not refer to it every day, but this is something that we looked at. And with that, reviewing the Constitution, that's something that you don't even have to do with your officers. If that's something you want to do with your entire organization, so that going into the next year, all those members that will still be a part of it, they know kind of the expectations of this is our organization, this is our purpose, this is what we do. Then you can let them know, hey, like the new incoming president, whether that be you or not, say, hey, we talked about this last semester, and you voted yes to all these bylaws that we updated, or voted yes to continue doing things the way we did. So, like, unfortunately, you're not eligible, and this is the process we'll have to go through in order to elect a new officer, or whatever your constitution or bylaws outlines that you need to do. So other than that, do you all have any questions for me that I can answer in terms of this presentation, or any just additional questions that I can answer for you all as student organizations?
Where do you